The scent of fresh coffee drifted lazily through the elegant atmosphere of Willow and Pine Café, a place known for its polished surfaces, quiet chatter, and upscale clientele. Tucked into a corner booth sat a young girl no older than 10. Her posture was perfectly upright, her dress crisply ironed, and her dark glasses hid the worry stirring in her eyes. Her small hands patted around the table, searching for something she couldn't see. There should have been a Braille menu, but there wasn't. "Mommy, come back soon," she whispered to herself again and again, a fragile chant that seemed to hold her together. The room around her moved on. People glanced, but quickly looked away. Behind the counter, Emily Carter paused mid-wipe, her eyes drawn to the child like gravity. Emily was no stranger to difficult moments. At 26, she had worked in service for nearly a decade, putting herself through school before dropping out to care for her younger brother. She had seen children cry, parents yell, and wealthy patrons treat kindness like a favor owed. But something about this girl, her composure, her loneliness, the way she tried to hide her panic under silence, made Emily's chest tighten. She turned to Brad, the manager, and asked, "Has anyone taken table 9? Without looking up from his phone, Brad replied, "VIP table." Her mother's some big shot, said not to let anyone near the kid until she gets back. Emily frowned. She's been alone for over 20 minutes. Brad sighed, barely containing his annoyance. "You're on probation, Emily. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was the moment the girl accidentally knocked over the flower vase. The water splashed across the table and onto her dress. Her lips trembled, and she reached blindly for napkins, trying in vain to clean up the mess. Around her, heads turned, but no one moved. Emily didn't hesitate. She stepped from behind the counter and walked directly to the table, ignoring the sudden silence that fell over the cafe. She knelt beside the girl and smiled softly. "Hi there. I'm Emily. I'm here to help. Would you mind if I cleaned this up for you?" The girl froze her head, turning slightly. "Where's my mum?" "Not back yet, but I thought maybe I could bring you something warm to drink while you wait." There was a long pause, then the girl whispered, "I'm Sophie. I think I made a mess." Emily gently blotted the water with a towel and helped straighten the table. "It's okay, Sophie. Accidents happen to all of us," she said kindly. "You're lying," Sophie replied with a tiny smile. "Adults lie when they want you to feel better." Emily laughed, caught off guard by the child's honesty. "Okay," she said, "there's a small puddle, but the table will survive. Are you hungry?" Sophie hesitated. "Mom says not to eat until she gets back." "How about some hot chocolate on the house?" Emily offered. "Just between us." The faint smile that spread across Sophie's face made Emily feel like the sun had broken through the windows. It wasn't just the offer, it was the way she said it, as if Sophie was more than just a responsibility left behind. Moments later, Emily returned with a tray, hot chocolate, a sandwich, and a small plate of cookies. She narrated the table layout to Sophie, guiding her hands to each item with calm clarity. "The cup is here, the cookies are just to your right," she explained gently. Sophie listened carefully, then tilted her head. "You don't sound like the others. They talk like I'm broken." Emily's face softened. "My brother is blind. I know you're not broken, you're brilliant and brave." For the next 15 minutes, they spoke about books, music, and the way the stars might feel if you couldn't see them. Emily didn't notice the time, nor did she see the black town car pull up outside. She didn't see the woman in the tailored suit sitting quietly behind tinted glass, watching with piercing eyes. Katherine Walker, CEO of Walker Dynamics, had returned to retrieve her daughter and to observe. From the moment her car rolled to a stop, she had studied the interaction through the cafe window. Not one detail escaped her. The way Sophie laughed. The way Emily leaned in to listen, not out of duty, but out of interest. The way Emily didn't flinch when Sophie questioned her. Katherine had expected disappointment when she left Sophie there, another failed test of human decency. But what she saw was something unexpected, a stranger treating her daughter with the kind of tenderness money couldn't buy. She didn't step out of the car. Not yet. She needed to know more. And in that quiet, watchful moment, the future of all three lives began to shift. The soft chime above the cafe door rang with an authority that made the entire room stir. Conversations faltered, utensils paused mid-air, and even the barista subtly straightened his posture. Katherine Walker had arrived. Her tailored charcoal coat swept behind her as she walked with precision heels echoing sharply against the polished floor. Her eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses locked onto table 9. As she approached the manager, Brad practically stumbled over himself to greet her, mumbling apologies and excuses. But Katherine didn't break stride. She moved past him as if he didn't exist, stopping only when she reached the table where Emily was now helping Sophie finish her hot chocolate. Emily Carter Katherine said, her tone flat, almost surgical. "I believe you took it upon yourself to feed my daughter." Emily rose slowly, her heart thudding, but her expression remained calm. "She was hungry," she replied. Sophie turned her head toward her mother's voice and beamed. Mommy Emily was so nice. She told me about constellations and how hot chocolate smells like winter. Catherine's jaw twitched. Her gaze dropped to the half-empty plate, the crumpled napkins, and the crumbs scattered near Sophie's hand. With precise movements, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a slim checkbook, and began to write. How much, she asked, coolly. "For the meal. And your kindness." She tore the check from the book and slid it across the table without waiting for a response. Emily glanced down. The amount had more zeros than she'd ever seen in one place, but her hands remained at her sides. "I don't want your money," Emily said softly but firmly. A hush spread through the cafe, as if the air itself had frozen. "You left your daughter alone for nearly 2 hours. She was scared. You turned her into a test, some kind of experiment to see who'd care." Catherine's expression didn't change, but the set of her jaw hardened. "And you passed clearly. You could use that money." "Maybe I could," Emily replied, eyes steady. "But I'm not for sale, especially not for doing what any decent human being should have done." The silence between them stretched. Catherine's carefully cultivated exterior, polished, unreadable, impenetrable, flickered for a brief second. This wasn't how people responded to her, especially not people like Emily. Then something unexpected happened. Katherine didn't argue. She didn't call for Brad or threaten to have Emily fired. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if re-evaluating her opponent. "Tell me," she said at last, "have you ever worked as a companion before?" Emily blinked. "No." "Would you?" Katherine asked. "Full-time." "For Sophie. It's a live-in position, highly compensated. You'd have access to resources, travel, education, and stability." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Why me?" "Because," Katherine replied slowly, "my daughter has a gift for detecting dishonesty. She listens beyond the words. She trusts you. That doesn't happen often." Sophie, sitting between them, sipped her cocoa and smiled. "Emily tells the truth even when it's awkward." The words made Katherine pause. "I don't make decisions based on emotion." Katherine continued, now taking the seat across from Emily. "But I recognize value when I see it. Your background is impressive: college dropout, 3 jobs, caregiver to a blind sibling, clean record, disciplined." Emily's breath caught. How do you know that Katherine didn't answer? "She didn't have to. What I need," she said, folding her hands, "is someone with emotional intelligence and backbone. Not just for Sophie, but for the world she lives in. It's not kind, and she needs someone who doesn't treat her like glass." Emily looked at Sophie, who now rested her head on her hand, listening to their voices like music. For a moment, Emily said nothing. The waitress, who had simply wanted to help a child, now found herself staring at a future she hadn't imagined, one that dangled opportunity, influence, and danger in equal measure. She had seen this kind of power before, how it could shape, break, or quietly destroy lives with a phone call. And yet, despite the control Katherine clearly wielded, there was something else in her offer, a need. Not desperation, but vulnerability, disguised as strategy. "I'm not agreeing to anything tonight," Emily said finally. "But I'll think about it for Sophie's sake." Katherine nodded once. No smile, no warmth. Just a slight dip of her head like a queen acknowledging a new player on the board. As she rose and guided Sophie from the table, she said only one thing before leaving. "We'll be in touch." And Miss Carter don't mistake dignity for disobedience. Sometimes they're the same. From the moment Emily Carter stepped into the Walker residence, it felt less like entering a home and more like stepping into a museum, grand, immaculate, and emotionally silent. Every surface gleamed, every piece of furniture stood in its precise place, but nothing felt lived in. Sophie, however, was a stark contrast. The little girl's imagination filled rooms with questions, wonder, and laughter that had long been absent. Under Emily's daily care, Sophie began to flourish. They explored music together, created tactile art, and even invented games that revolved around identifying scents and sounds. Emily encouraged Sophie to express what she felt rather than what she thought others expected from her. In time, Sophie began to speak more, dream more, and for the first time in years, genuinely smile without reservation. As their bond deepened, Emily also noticed subtle details about the house and the people in it. There were locked drawers in every room. Conversations with the staff were clipped and often filled with tension. Katherine rarely joined them, always disappearing into her office or off to some distant meeting. One afternoon, while tidying up Sophie's closet, Emily found a box shoved far behind folded blankets. Inside, she discovered an old USB drive and a leather-bound journal. The handwriting was unmistakably Katherine's. Curiosity warred with hesitation, but instinct pushed her forward. That night, once Sophie was asleep, Emily opened the files. Her blood ran cold. Photos of a car accident, news articles that had never been published, medical scans, and a sealed police report linking Katherine to the crash that blinded her daughter. Worse still was the email chain between Katherine and her legal team, clear evidence that she had used her wealth and influence to bury the incident. One message from a man named Trevor Jason Walker, Katherine's estranged brother, stood out. "She deserves to know the truth," Kat, it read. "You can't protect her from what she already feels." Emily barely slept. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She would find Jason. A name and a city search was all it took. He lived quietly on the outskirts of town, far from his sister's empire. Jason opened the door cautiously, but listened without interrupting. When Emily showed him the USB, he sat down in silence. "I tried," he said finally, "but she shut everyone out after the accident. I walked away when she refused treatment options that could have helped." Together, they began connecting the dots. Jason confirmed that Katherine had taken Sophie to an obscure medical clinic several times a year under the pretense of evaluations. But these weren't real consultations. They were rituals designed to validate a false narrative. "She wants to believe that as long as Sophie stays blind, she'll never see what really happened," Jason muttered bitterly. Emily's heart ached. This wasn't just overprotection, it was guilt turned into control. And now that she had uncovered this deception, she couldn't unsee it. Emily and Jason decided to follow the trail. Using information buried in appointment records, they traced the location of the remote clinic, a hidden facility just outside the city, isolated and surrounded by high fences, the kind of place where secrets stayed buried. 2 days later, under the guise of a casual weekend away, Emily planted a GPS tracker in Sophie's backpack just in case Katherine attempted another secret visit. The moment the device lit up, pinging from the very coordinates they suspected, Emily called Jason. Together, they drove through winding roads to a facility nestled between silent hills. What they saw through the clinic windows chilled them to the core. Sophie sitting alone in an exam room, confused but calm, while Katherine argued furiously with a doctor outside. Jason leaned in. "She does this twice a year," he whispered. "She demands repeated tests until someone confirms there's no hope. But there is Emily. There always was." Emily turned away, her face set with quiet fury. The woman who had offered her a job and a paycheck had also stolen years of hope from her own daughter. Everything Emily had learned about Katherine, her brilliance, her power, her cruelty, crystallized in that moment. This wasn't just about wealth or pride. It was about a mother paralyzed by her own mistakes, afraid to let her daughter see the truth literally and metaphorically. Emily wasn't just Sophie's companion now. She had become her advocate, her protector, the one person willing to confront the storm rather than walk around it. She turned to Jason and said, "We have to stop her. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but because Sophie deserves a future that's hers, not one rewritten by guilt and lies." And in that quiet promise, Emily crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just in Catherine's world anymore, she was about to turn it upside down. The afternoon sun filtered through the frosted windows of the remote clinic, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. Inside, Katherine Walker stood in a heated exchange with a physician whose discomfort was evident in his body language. Charts and reports lay scattered on the counter, the doctor clearly overwhelmed by the force of Catherine's demands. Hidden just beyond the edge of the building, Emily and Jason watched the scene unfold through a narrow window pane. The air between them crackled with tension. In Emily's hand was the folder, every piece of evidence they had gathered: medical records, suppressed treatments, falsified evaluations, and the sealed documents proving Catherine's role in Sophie's blindness. "It's time," Jason whispered. Emily nodded and stepped forward, her heart steady despite the storm waiting inside. When Emily pushed open the door to the clinic, the hush that followed felt absolute. Catherine turned sharply, her mouth halfway open in reprimand, but stopped when she saw Jason behind Emily and the folder in her hand. "What are you doing here?" Catherine's voice was sharp, but it held something else to fear. Emily met her gaze. "We know everything," she said calmly. "The accident, the cover-up, the treatments you cancelled. You've manipulated every doctor, buried every option, and kept your daughter in the dark, literally and emotionally." She placed the folder on the table between them. "This ends now." Jason stepped forward, his voice steady. "You don't get to rewrite the past anymore, Kat. Sophie deserves the truth. You've kept her blind, not just in vision, but in life." A door creaked gently behind them. Sophie had entered the room. She didn't speak at first, just listened. Her expression was unreadable, but her silence was deafening. Slowly, she walked toward her mother. "Mom," she said softly, "I always knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what, but I felt it in the way people whispered around me, in how you cried at night when you thought I was asleep." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "What hurt me wasn't the accident. It wasn't losing my sight. It was knowing deep down that you were hiding something from me, and that you didn't believe I was strong enough to handle the truth." Catherine's mouth parted, but no words came. For the first time in her life, the woman who controlled empires found herself disarmed by her own child. Catherine fell to her knees. Tears, unrestrained and silent, ran down her cheeks. "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared that if you saw what I'd done, you'd hate me. I thought I was protecting you." Sophie knelt in front of her, reaching out with practiced hands to find her mother's face. "I don't hate you for the accident," she said. "I hate the years we lost to lies." Her fingers brushed Catherine's tears, and for a moment time seemed to hold its breath. There were no titles in that room, no billion-dollar companies, no power plays, just a mother shattered by guilt and a daughter quietly reclaiming her truth. Jason turned away, wiping his eyes. Emily stood still, letting the weight of the moment settle. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an unburdening. The doctor, who had stood frozen during the exchange, cleared his throat gently. "Miss Sophie," he said, "there is a treatment. It's experimental, but early tests show a 60% chance of partial vision recovery. Your mother declined it repeatedly, but we're still able to proceed if that's what you want." Sophie turned to Emily, her face unreadable behind her dark glasses. "What would you do?" she asked quietly. Emily stepped forward and took her hand. "It's not about what I would do," she said gently. "It's about what you want. It's your choice, Sophie. Your life." The little girl stood silent for a long time, then finally spoke, her voice clear, strong, and full of quiet determination. "I want to try, and I want Emily with me the whole way. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in the fabric of all their lives. Sophie's decision wasn't just about treatment, it was a declaration, a rejection of control, a choice for freedom. Catherine, still on her knees, looked up at her daughter with eyes full of something no one had seen in her before: humility. For so long she had tried to control fate, erase guilt with silence, and hold power through secrecy. But now her empire of control was crumbling, not because of scandal, but because truth had finally been spoken. And it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, honest, unshakable. As Sophie was led into the exam room for preliminary assessments, Catherine remained seated on the floor, a woman undone not by force, but by the one thing she never expected: the courage of a child and the defiance of a woman who refused to be bought. The first time Sophie saw color again, it wasn't in a grand reveal or dramatic gasp. It was a soft moment, almost whispered by the world. She was sitting in the garden behind the Walker mansion, her hand brushing against the leaves of an old maple tree, when she paused and said quietly, "It's orange and brown at the same time." Emily, who had been reading aloud beside her, froze. You saw that Sophie nodded slowly, her voice trembling. Just the shape, the edge of it, like a shadow but warmer. Over the weeks that followed the experimental treatment, Sophie's vision slowly partially returned. It wasn't full clarity, but it was enough to see the outline of a friend's face, the color of her paintbrush, the soft flicker of sunlight through her bedroom curtains. And with it came a new hunger for life. She poured herself into art sculpting tactile pieces that told stories through touch and shadow. Her music lessons resumed with even more passion. Sophie, once confined to silence and secrecy, was now blossoming into a force of creativity, curiosity, and quiet strength. For Catherine, the transformation was equally profound, though less visible to the world. She no longer arrived late to therapy appointments or spent her nights behind locked doors in her office. She began attending Sophie's lessons, asking questions, listening more than speaking. Her phone, once a permanent extension of her hand, often sat untouched on the table beside her. And then one morning she invited Emily to her office, not with the usual cold formality, but with a warmth that still felt unfamiliar coming from her. On the table sat a stack of documents. "I want you to run the foundation," Catherine said simply. "Not as an employee, as a partner. 40% ownership, full autonomy. You'll oversee new research, outreach, everything." Emily stared, stunned. "Why me?" Catherine looked her in the eye. "Because you saw my daughter when I only saw her condition, and because you believed in something I didn't: healing through truth, not control." Emily accepted, not for the title or the share, but for the chance to amplify what she had always believed in: that every child deserved to be seen, not managed. Under her leadership, the newly renamed Walker Foundation for Vision transformed. Outreach programs extended to rural schools. Grants were offered for families who couldn't afford advanced care. The foundation funded not just cutting-edge research, but community-based support systems that treated people as whole humans, not case files. Daniel, Emily's younger brother, now flourished at Wellington Academy, where his piano recitals earned standing ovations. Catherine, once guarded and calculating, became an unexpected advocate, writing publicly about her past mistakes and encouraging other parents to trust their children's resilience. And as for Sophie, she became a symbol of the foundation's new chapter, not as a poster child, but as an artist, a learner, and a voice of her own. On Sophie's 11th birthday, the mansion's gates opened, not for executives, politicians, or press, but for the community. Dozens of families from the foundation arrived with their children, filling the estate with laughter and movement. The once silent halls echoed with stories and music. In the heart of the garden, Sophie stood proudly beside her first public exhibit, a collection of sculptures and paintings designed to be felt as much as seen. Each piece bore a small plaque with Sophie's words: "Sometimes we feel the world before we see it. That's still real." Catherine stood by, quietly greeting parents, kneeling to speak with children, and listening, truly listening. At one point, a little girl tugged at her sleeve and asked, "Are you blind too?" Catherine smiled. knelt down and replied, "Not anymore. My daughter and someone very brave taught me how to see." As the day faded and the guests said their goodbyes, Sophie gave her mother a wrapped box. Inside was a small canvas textured with mixed materials, soft wool, rough burlap, and a splash of vibrant yellow and blue. "I made this for you," she said, "to remind you that sometimes we lose something, so we can learn to feel everything else better." Catherine held the gift to her chest, her eyes glassy with gratitude. Emily stood nearby, quietly observing the family she had once only glimpsed from behind a counter. Now she was part of their legacy. A legacy born not of wealth or status, but of vulnerability, reckoning, and the courage to change. 6 months earlier, none of this had seemed possible. A waitress with nothing to lose, a child trapped in shadow, a mother consumed by guilt. But now, standing in a home no longer defined by secrets, they had each rewritten their futures. One had chosen to see the truth, one had dared to change, and one had held steady to her values when the world offered her every reason to compromise. Together they had built not just a foundation for vision, but a vision for what healing could truly mean. Quiet, compassionate, and real. If this story moved, you don't forget to support Deep Inside HQ by subscribing to the channel. Every week we share powerful, human-centered stories, like Sophie's stories, that remind us how truth, compassion, and courage can change lives. Hit the like button if you believe healing begins with honesty, and share this video to inspire someone who may need to be seen, heard, or simply reminded that their story isn't over. Stay connected, stay thoughtful, and remember, at Deep Inside HQ, we see the people behind the headlines.